Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Human. I'm Joe Klemczewski with Jeff Stucke, and we're going to sort out this episode as we go because Jeff, I originally punted this over to you and said, "Hey, what should we do? I want to do something on a little bit more grounded, how do you orient yourself in your life, foundational type topic." And you came up with, well, a lot of my clients are coming to me saying the world is on fire, everything's crumbling. Like, how do I even survive this? Is it worth, like, what do I do with my life at this point? And I went in a couple different directions thinking about, that kind of smacks of anxiety, but as an actual mental, I don't want to say disorder, it's a sociological, thing that we have to deal with. That probably deserves its own series. This is more like ease and contentment. How would I operate in any world circumstance? If I'm 20 years old or 70 years old, have I really developed those skills? So, what comes to your mind as just a framework for what we can build this series around?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things. I think I would again say the pervasiveness of just people that are just unsettled. And it's pretty pervasive in my professional sphere, also personal sphere. I mean, it's just, and to some degree, finding that balance in my own life, like, how much do I sit and contemplate the dumpster fire versus, okay, now this anxiety, this fear, this anger it's not helping me, but what do I do? And I think there's an underlying test for men, since we're speaking to men, um, not exclusively, but inclusively, intentionally. I think there's a resilience test that we can kind of look at to the degree that, given the circumstances, all of the division and the number of things that we can either be pissed off about and yell and scream or panicky or whatever that is, what is our ability to rise above that and affect more than be affected? And so I'd say that would be one, kind of our point of entry, is just starting that discussion of men, of what degree do you feel affected versus feeling like you can affect? And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it makes me feel like, and I've had these thoughts in the last few weeks. When you said we are being tested or this is a test of resilience, think about the entire anthropology of human history. And we're certainly living in this one sliver of time that we all, maybe around our age, especially because we've lived through a few decades, it does feel like things are pretty wobbly, like things could go downhill fast. People are talking about losing our democracy and our station in the entire world. We are no longer the lone superpower. We're the seventh nation when it comes to actual, bond scoring and so forth. So we're not even the one that gets invested in the most. We collectively as a nation are becoming Detroit as a metaphor. Nothing against Detroit, but they are 25% the population they were at their height, and it's not a good look for growth and progress. And a lot of us are feeling that, but we're also not Ukraine. We're also not Gaza. We could environmentally as well as socially be on this precipice of super downward spiraling, or with AI, it could be better in 10 or 20 years. It's just there's so much uncertainty, and that does create this collective consciousness of unease. So I understand why you said you had so many clients who are, teetering on that chair right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if we, look down the corridor of time, it wasn't that long ago where people woke up in the morning and were like, holy fuck, I'm still alive. Like I, I get to breathe again today. I get to go hunt or gather or have sex or play with my children and then go to sleep and wonder, will I get to wake up? And, so the level of security and stability that we have known is probably more the anomaly for human beings than radical instant change and uncertainty and unsafety. And to the degree, how much have we been lulled into a sense of entitlement that I am just owed? And I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't be aware politically of the kinds of things that you just said and those kinds of things. But it's also uh, we we also have to keep that in perspective of the entire evolutionary scope, and we have the ability to be very resilient. And and this has kind of been a marker for me. How much do I just sit and obsess about, oh my God, what about this? And I thought I was going to be able to retire sooner than maybe I'm going to keep working. And then what about my children? And now my daughter's engaged and our grandchildren, or to the point, or do I just live my life with the certainty that I can affect my circumstances for as long as I have breath in my lungs? And I don't think that's hyperbole. I do think that that's not much of an oversimplification of the choices that we're presented with. And then with the 24-hour news cycle and fucking TikTok and Reels and YouTube and every other thing that can pump me as full of fear and anger as I will allow them to pump me full of, it's like, how do I want to live my life?
Yeah, and I want to make the social media and the 24-hour news cycle kind of an aside. I don't want to make it all about that, but 15 or so years ago, it became very evident to me how this would be very divisive, not encouraging inclusiveness, social media in general. And I used to use this metaphor, and back then the world population was 7 billion, now it's 8. I said, imagine overnight throwing 7 billion rats in a shoebox and just let's see what happens. Like that's what social media has done. You don't get a break from it unless you intentionally do. And even when you do, you know what's there, and you're FOMOing yourself into doom scrolling again and finding out what's happening in the world. And it's just very hard. I think as a discipline, this is part of social evolution. Everybody has those moments. When I got my first cell phone, a BlackBerry 20 years ago, it was my portal to being able to get ahead and work. Like I can message people quickly and I can get done and I can kind of check it off my list. Then all of a sudden, it's just an extension of your hand and you never put it down. And now you can just do more work. Everybody goes through that cycle where they finally say, okay, I'm done. I got to create some boundaries. We got to leave the phones off the kitchen table. When I go to bed, it's got to stay in the living room. We make our kids do that. Like everybody has grown up to a degree, I hope,
I
to
was going to say, do you have data to support that assertion?
well, I mean, how many times have you heard people say, "I'm going off social media. I need a fast." Like, goodbye, world. You're not going to see me for three
Oh, you
months.
hear it all the time, but then it's
Right.
like the next day
And
they're
then they
like,
come back.
wait, I thought you were.
But again, that's part of that consciousness where we all know it's just painful for us. But that's all the more reason to back all the way up to the first square. And I want to, because I've gone through clinical anxiety treatment. And so I have an appreciation for the power of our organic brain. Did you
Okay.
ever see that TED talk when a neuroscientist actually had a stroke and she could not talk for a year?
Yeah,
Did
it's been a minute. Can you
yeah.
highlight that? I do remember it.
So
Um,
a female 50s, 60s-year-old neuroscientist woke up one day and one of the things that I remember her saying was like she knew something was wrong, like something feels wrong and the way she's seeing things and perceiving things. And so she goes to get her phone to like phone her brother or something and she doesn't even she looks at her phone, doesn't know what it is. Like, what am I holding? What is this? Hi. And somebody finds her eventually, and she's had a full-blown stroke. And for an entire year, she's nonverbal. She has paralysis, and she's going through all of that stuff, all those treatments and symptoms and rehab. And yet, in her brain, in her mind, she was 100% herself, and she just couldn't communicate. She could hear, she could think. And so that developed in her this insight of just how organic our brains are. You've also probably seen people doing neurosurgery and they're fully conscious, and the neurosurgeon can probe this neuron or this part of your brain and make them laugh, make you have this memory, it's just, we've seen with pharmacological interventions, things like MDMA and psilocybin and LSD in a lab with an fMRI scanning your brain in real time, and you can see, that you are your brain. When your brain is offline, you are offline, whether you're asleep, unconscious, in a coma, or dead. You are your brain. No brain, no you. All of that to say, when we're talking about contentment, happiness, unease, our brain is having a reaction biochemically, electrically, things like cortisol, and we're getting these symptoms. And so I want you, Jeff, to think, of course, with your therapeutic brain, but parallel to that, why has everybody, not everybody, but every society at some point created a field of discipline to address this? From Buddhism to Hinduism to Alan Watts to, anybody else doing neurological research to say, okay, here is our issue with anxiety as human beings, our inability to be resilient in the world. And so, how do we fix it? We always come up with the questions, how do we fix it? But then we end up with all of these worldviews and treatments of it. So, where do you start? What's your grounding point when a client comes to you with this kind of disturbance?
The the simplicity of it, and again, this is going to sound cliche because it is, and it's cliche because it's true. You only have one control of one thing. There's one thing that you always have control of, and that is you. And do you want to be in a reactive state? Because when you're in a reactive state, then it either direction it compounds the fear, the anxiety, the helplessness, whatever that is. Or do you want to insulate yourself enough that you are in a proactive, assertive state? And when people are in hyper this hyper state of agitation and helplessness or rage, whichever one, it's like, no, you don't understand how fucked we are. We are so fucked that they're so okay, then what do we do? Do we just sit here and just be pissed off until, what, either way? And what is something that you can control? And I mean, I'd be interested to know the degree to which you rely on this, but it's like, what can I control? One of the popular things that's gone around recently is make your bed. And literally and metaphorically, that is something that I control. I look I look at a made bed and I don't give a fuck about making your bed, and typically when I work with a client, I try to find the assertive behaviors that are valuable to them. Because that's something that they're going to manifest, right? It's something like, I can do this. Um, Dude, how therapeutic is kindness? How therapeutic is it to even say hi? How therapeutic is it to one of the I can't do it anymore, but one of the things that uh, I started doing this summer, I live on Lake Michigan, and it's called Lake Shore Trail, goes right beside Lake Shore, Michigan. It's by two prominent hospitals. So it is often that someone is pushing a patient in a wheelchair, usually a family member. Um, Fucking one day, for reasons that I can't even explain, the wife was obviously pushing her husband, and I said, "Hey, could I push for a little while and you can walk with your husband?" And dude, it was like doing cocaine. I've not done cocaine, but I mean, maybe not cocaine. Maybe it was more like ecstasy, MDMA. I don't know, whatever it was. And I, had my ear pods in. I was not interacting with them, simply watching them hold hands, and that I got to participate in that in an unintrusive sort of way.
It's amazing.
It, it's, it, Find something that you can control. And if that control is an expression of kindness,
So I like that. So your first point is control something, be proactive, be pro-assertive. I want to tell you a framework I did. We did this immersive weekend experience that was amazing. I was so far in over my head, but it was amazing. And I called it strategic consciousness. And we invited 6 or 8 guests. We rented this huge Airbnb in Seattle, and me and another friend of mine who also has a master's degree in psychology. Like we kind of ran this. We had a health psychologist who kind of remotely zoomed in and was helping facilitate. And it was just incredible just to have this experience together. But the whole format for me, Jeff, was to say, okay, we want our lives to be better. For whatever reason you are here, you came here because you want to see something advance in your life. My portion was to say, again, biology guy, here is our brain. We pull in sensory information. Afferent information stimuli hits our brain, some of it subconscious, some of it through all the other senses. And then our brain interprets that, and signals and reactions go everywhere. And then we have a reaction. Is it the reaction you want? If you're not enjoying the life and having the behaviors and the outcomes you want, then you have to reformat your brain. This is all based in neuroplasticity. So how do you do that? It does take what you said is intentionality, something proactive, and it starts with just having that illustration of I am physically going to restructure my brain. We know that takes 6, 9, 12 months to do. And I start with that worldview level. And I'm going to give you kind of the framework, and we can talk about them one at a time, even beyond this first episode. But worldview first, I doubt many people listening have even contemplated what is my world view. The greatest first step, Descartes called it foundationalism. What is the one thing where you say, this is my non negotiable? This is who I am. This is what I believe. Everything gets filtered through this. Then you have to have a psychological model, almost like the operating system. So something like self-determination theory, positive psychology. Here's why I think the way I do through this foundational worldview grid. Then we get into things like life schemas. What are the big principles that I think are important in life? Be kind to your neighbors. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor. Whatever it is, like you have these schemas on top of that emanate from your worldview through your psychological model. Then you get to your innate personality traits. And then you get to your outcomes. And so all of this stuff is flowing through your brain. You have to go back to those foundational layers and start making intentional changes. And every therapist, every psychological discipline can talk about it differently, describe it differently. But that is ultimately where we come from and return to. So when I say worldview, foundational belief structure, what comes to your mind?
holy shit, what the fuck is that? I'm screwed. I don't even know what he's talking about. Now, I would say I'm answering that to you somewhat tongue in cheek with how a potential client would respond to that. So mine is I will tell you that I have a nuanced difference is that I tend to function in self-efficacy. I think self-esteem is nonsense. Who the fuck cares how you feel about your, I mean, no offense, but I'll use the language, but I remember early on a Harvard study evaluating self-esteem and people that were sentenced to a life sentence in maximum security prisons rated highest on self-esteem. So it's like, what the hell is this a measure of? Like, so self-efficacy, my belief in my ability to handle life. So again, most people, they need, from my perspective, people need a little bit of momentum before they can handle that question. And and what I find, Joe, is that most people are two things. They are not willing to start small enough. The change that they need to make, they're unwilling to start small enough. Most people start way too big. And and I'll tell them, like, okay, let's say metaphorically that lifting 300 pounds is your goal. You and I can go over to the 300 pounds right now and you can pull and pull and pull until you blow something apart. And then you won't be back in the gym for who knows how long. Or we can start small enough and be consistent enough that we will get there in a way that will enable us to be successful. And the reason that that is so important is even when you want to make a positive change, you are still moving from the known to the unknown. The brain resists that. The brain, the amygdala can't interpret it, can't interpret positive change from negative change. It interprets change as negative. And so if you expose it too much too fast, the only thing that you're going to the only thing that you're going to experience is the whiplash effect to where now your world is even smaller and you're that much more discouraged that so you have to be willing to start small enough. Most of your goals aren't too they're it's like you got to dream big and you got to and it's like I mean it's okay to have that as a vision, but if you think you're just going to start with that and you're going to achieve it tomorrow, you are going to be devastatingly disappointed. So are you willing to start small enough and do that consistently enough until you can go to the next level up and the next level up? Once I start to get, first of all, get buy-in with that, which is hard to do. It doesn't, because everything out there promises way too much, way too big, way too fast. And it's like, hey, do you notice how it says results not typical? Because the results ain't fucking typical because it doesn't fucking work. But whatever, that's what they want, the illusion of this quick, easy, huge success. If you'll do this, will you do before you see me again next week? Will you do this small thing every day? And the follow through is it just, well, that's not a, no, I got to do, that's not big and that's not strong enough. Now, if I can get that level of buy-in and start to create some positive momentum through behavioral change, which then generates self-efficacy, my belief in my ability to handle life, then I can start to add weight of some of those conceptual ideas. What's your worldview? Now, I start with value. What do you value most? And what I find is that most people have kind of this mythical view of values. It's like values are like, oh, well, I value, all human life. Or it's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. What is the most important thing to you? What do you value? And getting them to embrace their personal values. And to the point, Joe, of identifying them. Maybe they suck. That's a stupid fucking value, and that's why you're so depressed. Let's change that value. But we first have to identify what you are currently valuing. And then I can take those two things, the concrete on the behavioral side, continuing to do the small thing consistently enough that you start to believe in yourself, shift that over to the conceptual side of, so what is it that you value? What do you mean? What am I supposed to value? Let's start with what you currently value. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I guess I'll ask Chat GPT to tell me what I value. But then finally getting them to identify that and then start to modify the conceptual from the momentum that we're generating on the behavioral to where now they have an identity that can say, this is what I believe. This is what I stand for. This is my worldview. And I'm not reacting to somebody else's by either conforming to it. Oh, well, they believe that, so I guess I should believe that too. Or reacting against it. That's fucking stupid. Why would anybody believe that? But I now have my own, what I refer to as internal locus of control. I know who I am and I exercise who I am, regardless of the circumstances or environment.
So what's great about what you just said is you went through what I explained with a different description. Everything you just described in having to start small and build toward this step and the next step and the next step is what neuroplasticity allows. No neuroplasticity change, no outcome or behavior change. So you're walking them through that, and then a value is a life schema. So you just moved up to the second level, which is now what do I believe? And I want you, without even realizing it, to prove yourself correct by answering this question.
Oh, Jesus, hold on. Now that fucking stressed me out. Like, okay, okay, I think I'm
Are you
ready.
ready? If I came into your office and said, Jeff, I believe if I martyr myself, like I'm going to strap on a bomb and go blow up an entire city block of people, I get to go to heaven and have 72 virgins. If I said that's what I believe, and by the way, I'm having some marital issues. Can you help? Can you do a little marriage therapy for my wife and I? Like, would you say, whoa, like maybe your worldview has something to do with the way you treat your spouse and the way you interpret your real life and all, like worldview, foundational worldview has an impact on everything else. Everything else is built on that. So I don't know, like, do you just have to, as a therapist, know that context where they're coming from, and then you just like, okay, that's cool, whatever you believe in, that's fine, or are you like, wait a second, these things are misaligned, and you can't do that if you believe this? Do you how basic do you start?
Very basic. And also, is it is it assertive creative or is it destructive? And it's like, okay, and now you're saying that you have marital problems and you want to blow up the fucking world. Well, okay, how about we let for me, I'm going to attach it more to the lack of success, the lack of you know hopelessness or whatever it is that you feel in your marriage. If I can start to affect that positively, then maybe that worldview is going to change a little bit. Or I'd probably refer that case specifically.
I got the perfect therapist for you in another state.
Here's what I think. I think I've got a friend named Joe Klemczewski, and I think this is more his sweet spot. So,
Yeah. So, have you in your life ever, because this is another test of neuroplasticity, how many times in your life have you made an entire worldview change? I believe the world is innately good or innately bad, or people are good, people are bad, or America is the greatest country in the world, American exceptionalism, or it's colonialism and it's horrible. Like, or a faith change, a whatever. Like there are these big things people struggle with. And I had to seek counseling when I went through a large one. But I guess what I'm getting toward is we start out very idealistic. We're very young. There's a YouTube video that's fantastic. If you just type in YouTube, Dear Believer, a video, 10-minute video will come up that's got millions and millions of plays. And it shows you that 91% of every human being has a worldview that is only dependent on the family of which you were born, to which you were born. If you were born to a Catholic family, you're 99%, 91% a chance you're going to be Catholic. If you were born into a Muslim family, 91%. If you were born into a Democrat or just like that, that is your bedrock foundational view. And it gets ingrained into you. You're brainwashed. You absorb it. You believe it. It's Descartesism, foundational. And then for you to turn that car around somewhere down the road, it is catastrophic. It is a psychological and oftentimes a familial death.
It is Neo coming out of the Matrix.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's
And
like that is a documentary that is not sci-fi. That is what it is.
so you have to see people in different stages of this, and we can get off of this topic and move on to the next level. But I think everybody at some point needs to come to a point of self-awareness to say, wait a second, I do have a foundational belief. I do have a structure. Everything in my life goes through this grid. If I say I am XYZ religion or political affiliation or this or that, then that's where confirmation bias comes in, sunk cost bias. Everything else is wrong. I immediately discount anything as wrong. Everything, I only seek information that confirms my bias. I mean, look at RFK Jr., for example, or HHS secretary, the biggest, dumbest fucking moron on the planet, but he literally thinks he's right on everything. He literally thinks circumcision causes autism because I read it in a study, one study. That's how science works in his brain. But again,
How do you really feel about RFK Jr., Joe? Could you?
I have a whiteboard. I will diagram it. Um, but he believes it. Like foundationally, he has a certain environmental health perspective, and you're not going to change that guy's mind, right? Maybe 5 or 10 or 20 years down the line, he has a chance if he opens himself up to that new information. But if I was RFK and I said, okay, wait a second, why do I believe this? Where did I get this information? Is there a possibility I'm wrong? Can I, are my beliefs strong enough to stand up to the highest degree of scrutiny? Have I ever tried that? Have I sat down with people who vehemently disagree and really go through every bit of data and information I can to try to prove myself wrong? And then I can decide if my belief structure is worth having. And like I said, I just think you at least need that kind of examination because we're talking about contentment and having less anxiety and being more at ease with yourself, self efficacy, your control of your own outcomes. It's those roots start in your worldview because think of any worldview, which quasi means religious or not, or what form of religion or what form of unreligion. And then, what does that mean? What does that mean by all of your behaviors?
I don't know what the question is, Joe.
We go through this at least once a podcast. That's the point at which I
I
know
was
I've
holding
over.
on to it for a while, and then I was like, shit, I don't know what it is. Like,
We need like in chess that bell where you tap out like a limit. Ding.
like, damn it, he's gonna get to the end of this, and then I'm gonna have to say, wait, what is the question? And that's so I'll react to that a little bit, which I'm not sure that I'm hitting the mark. But one of the things that it's like universities used to be a place of the rigorous exchange of ideas. I mean, it's like, bring your ideas, we will expose them to a sledgehammer, and the truth will stand up. I mean, think of how rigorous the peer review process used to be. And, you send me your research, you send me your test methods, and I'm like, you're a dumb fuck. I'm going to disprove this. It just, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. That used to be built into the system. Um, and I mean, I don't, how then do you have safe spaces? And I don't know. I don't know where that intersection is, but the the proliferation of ideas and the ability just to throw them out there. And everything is like fragmentation right now. It's like in my algorithms or psychological discussions and those kinds of things, and it's like the whole notion of bro science. There's so much bro psychology out there. It's like, we used to have autism, and then we kind of expanded that to Asperger's, and now we have this thing called neurodivergence, which I'm going to need somebody to explain to me, because I don't even know what the hell that is. It's certainly not in anything that is approved. And I'm just saying that as alongside of this, it's just this fragmentation of this idea and this and this and that. Now I'm going to take this. And to your point with the autism and circumcision, and it's like one study that's not, I, our pursuit of truth is no longer rigorous enough. I don't know. I can't solve that problem right now, but I can certainly identify it as not everybody gets to give their slant on it.
So here's another way, maybe more succinctly, and then we can move off of
Let's go
this.
and see. Yeah.
Steven Pinker's new book,
Yes.
When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows. That is a great synthesis of where we are, because we no longer have small communities that we interact with in our families, in our cities. Now we have this global 8 billion rats in a shoebox every day just fighting for attention. So he went back to the beginning of, how do we decide what is true? What is worth saying? This is our foundation. This is what I believe. And therefore, I can find the community of like minded belief. So, worldview. Have you heard him talk about this concept yet? When everybody knows that everybody knows.
I Not enough that I've fully comprehended it. I've heard it enough. I got to spend more time digesting, but yes, I
Okay.
am aware of it.
So it's very much sped up today by the internet culture where you can find people like minded. But let me say to you that I've got this story, Jeff. My friend heard a talking donkey. And you're like, there's no way donkeys don't fucking talk. And you're like, no, my friend, like, he saw the talking donkey. And the talking donkey was God speaking to my friend. And then after a while, you're like, okay, I guess there's a talking donkey. And then you're part of the talking donkey club. So I know that the donkey talks. And all of a sudden, we've created this culture around, like, we all believe that donkeys talk. Like, if God has an important message, he talks to a donkey. And all of a sudden, now we have this group and we all believe that. Anybody else not in that group, they don't believe that. It wasn't a thing when I believed it. I had to have you believe it, and then I had to know that you believed it. When everybody knows that everybody knows, we have an accepted truth. That's where worldview is. I'm going to go all the way back to just the most, basic life form, because this is how societies are built. When I have to rely on you believing a certain thing, why is that important to me? Why do we find like-minded communities?
Why do we find, well, because they're like-minded. I mean, it's like,
Well, for predictability. I
precisely.
have to
Like
know that
it's
you
like, oh,
believe that.
that's familiar to me. So
Yeah.
I'm right.
When everybody knows that everybody knows. And so now it's not a like, do you murder people? Is that one of your values to not murder people and not rape people and not steal from people? Like you have a certain like the code of Hammurabi from the Sumerians, like, the Egyptians, like all of these laws kind of floated from one culture to another because they allowed for predictability. If everybody believes this, then we all have a sense of security. And then when somebody believes something a little bit differently, or we meet somebody and we don't know what they believe, like, whoa, we got to figure this shit out. Like that's why worldview is important, and a huge part of anxiety or lack of anxiety is I feel comfortable. So there's a lot of research that shows if you belong to a religious community, like your anxiety is less, you feel better because you feel right. You feel confirmed. You feel like I know that everybody knows what everybody knows, and it's what I know. And like we're all on the same team. That is for social predictability and control because it brings ease to a level where everybody's comfortable and can live together. Neighbors aren't killing each other. There's a great book, Contrast, the mountain people and the forest people, social science book from way back, and these tribal groups kind of split. Like one chimpanzee troop then it forms from another, and now they're warring tribes, even though they're literally related. Like all of a sudden they're enemies of each other because they've learned to believe different things. That those are the enemies, and we're not them. So these two different groups had unbelievably different social structures. One group was incredibly kind and altruistic, and they would take care of each other. Nothing bad ever happened. The other group, you couldn't turn around, or somebody's going to put an axe in the back of your head. Like they were just barbaric, law of the jungle kind of groups. Again, came from the same tribe. They just created that distance with social animosity, and then forever they were just that different because they had different worldviews. I'm simply saying that foundationally, I think it's worth that introspection that we know our behaviors and our outcomes and our thoughts are heavily rooted in those basic fundamental worldviews.
Yes. Yeah, I okay. I feel like though, and I know you're gonna okay boomer me, which is fine. But part of therapy, okay, a critical part of therapy, there are certain aspects of my job where you don't really need a degree. It's like it's this is obvious. And but what expertise is certainly one thing that separates my understanding of things, but also my ability to know when I can communicate what. And I would tell you that as a therapist, a lot of people can Google what's in the DSM-4, DSM-5. They can get the information, those kinds of things. Just because they have knowledge doesn't mean they have wisdom. But I know when I can say something and be heard, and I know when I can't. And part of the therapeutic relationship is being patient enough. Now, I know in the first 15 minutes, 90% of the time, of what the problem is and how to solve the problem. Doesn't mean they can hear it. I have to be strategic enough. I have to put in the time. I have to, it, there's, therapy is not necessarily efficient. It could be a lot more efficient if I could just say on the first day, look, fucking here, but it's until I have established enough emotional equity and rapport. I liken it to pennies in a jar. When a client comes in, the jar is empty. And so my job is to assess, okay, the problem is how many pennies? Is it 10 pennies? Is it 300 pennies? And then I have to start filling the jar. And if it's in, how how trusting is the client? How skeptical is the client? There's an infinite number of things, but the precision of making sure, okay, I now have invested enough pennies into the jar that if I start to take some out through confrontation, whatever it is, it's not going to empty the jar because when I empty the jar, the relationship is bankrupt. And so I think in our modern society, that sensitivity is something that we have just become almost nonsensical about. And I do think, again, here's where you'll call me okay boomer, which is not a compliment, correct?
I'm not going to do that. That was the last episode or
Okay.
two.
It's like the here's the difference between here's where your analogy of the box full of rats breaks down. Because the behavior of the rat in that box is regulated because there's immediate feedback. Social media takes that out. And it's like, I'm going to go comment on somebody who doesn't know me from fucking Adam's tweet, their thread about blah, 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 blah. Like, see, you're delusional. Like, it just, it, it, they don't know me. They don't give a shit. Like, what are we talking about?
No, but the perception, because Sam Harris addressed this a few different times, where when he went off of Twitter, just said, "I'm done. I'm done. I'm not on social media." He said, he felt this responsibility because you're right, like it's not instant, except that it is because it never leaves your mind. He knows he uses this example. He said, I was on vacation. I'm in like Hawaii with my family, and somebody was attacking me online. And so I had to respond. Like, this is my livelihood. This is my personhood. I have to. So all of a sudden I'm at the pool and on vacation in Hawaii. I'm like, motherfucker, I'm sitting here like responding back to this person. Now I'm angry and I'm pissed off and my vacation's fucked up. And it's like it's 8 billion rats in a box. Like you're just biting at each other all damn day and night if you participate in it that way. But that was only the pressure that in this part of our world, that's added. As I said, we're not in Ukraine, we're not in Gaza, we're not in 1945 UK worried if a bomb's going to drop on our heads. Like our pressures are now just that incessant, never-ending psychological stress. And I want to give you one example here to kind of move on because you started this entire conversation with a great phrase. You said, here's a good entry point for this topic. And you, because you're a cognitive behavioral therapist, you keep coming back to, and I don't disagree, the self efficacy. As a therapist, what can I help you understand you control right now? Get that little change this week, this little behavior modulation. Let's start that process of neuroplasticity. Here's what we can affect right now today. You know that I score 100% on personality inventories with conscientiousness. Where do you score?
-5.
Okay. So big difference in you and me, right? Okay. So if I have a worldview that says, let's say it's Lutheranism all over again, the 1600s, and you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this perfectly, you got to sit on your bare knees for 8 hours a day and pray, or this bad thing's going to happen. You tell a conscientious person like that, like me, and if 8 hours is the goal, I'm going to do 16, and you're going to lay in bed and say, I guess I'm just going to hell. And so worldview matters. And I know, like you brought up Dr. Seligman. I mean, one of the things I want to get to in one of our later episodes is actual personality psychology. They created this as the anti-DSM intentionally to say we have a DSM to tell us everything in the world that can be wrong with you. How about a manual that explains what's right with you? So, six virtues, 24 character strengths. What is your inventory? Excuse me. Because if you know this is just what my brain is, nature plus nurture, this is my personality. If I want self efficacy to work, I can't be grinding the gears every time. It has to become easier. There has to be more transmission fluid in between those gears so I can sink into that next level more easily. So let me ask you one more question as a way of wrapping this up into what we came here for, which is to help people have better ease, to reduce that tension they feel. Ultimately, what is your end point? Just for them to say, "Oh, Jeff, I feel great now. I can stop coming." Like, what changes do you need to see in them from a neuroscientific behavioral standpoint?
From my perspective, so there's 2 points to that, and let me emphasize this. When I work with my clients, the door is always open. It's not like, and I find that interesting about therapy. It's like, with physical health, you maintain a relationship with a doctor that you maintain over time. And you go in for a wellness check, but then if something derails, you go back in and you work on whatever that is. And it's like, yeah, the door is always open when you want to come through it. So I put that on them. But then as a practitioner, it's like my job is for them to come to me and say, I'm good. I don't need to see you for a while. And that's how I grade myself in that their ability, the desire to say, I'm good, man. I don't think I need to come back next week. Now, if they're delusional, obviously I will challenge that. But given the fact that we've moved through the rapport building stage, we've effectively entered the working stage of the relationship. And in effect, they say to me, I got this. That is, that's, and I'm pretty good at doing that, getting them to that place. I think when I am still the determiner of that, whether it's, you know, you're good, you don't need to come back anymore. If if I sense too high level of dependence, that's still my failure as a practitioner and my problem to solve that. And so those are kind of the the mechanisms that I use to evaluate the success. 1A, my success as a therapist. 1B, the success of the therapeutic relationship.
As a way of closing this out with just a little bit more practicality, what is something in your life where you can say maybe it's the largest, but at least a big deal that you can recall as a historic moment in your life where you can say, I had a lot of dis-ease in this area, and I had to do this, or I did this, and now I no longer do. Like now I feel contentment in that area of my life. Or maybe it is your whole life. Maybe it is very existential and foundational. But is there something you can point to and say, here's how this impacted my life?
Um, I mean, obviously, my movement out of religion, evangelical Christianity, um, and it it took me several times to break up with the master and creator and sustainer of the universe. It's like, hey God, I don't this orientation of making you happy and the stakes are eternal heaven or hell, like that just doesn't make any sense to me. Um, And I think having expectations that I'd break up on the first time, like, we wouldn't relapse and like have a one night stand and then like, no, no, this is bad for me. Um, and then finding an incremental path out of it. Like I didn't I I didn't have it's like no, I'm going to be done with that and then I'm going to go into this. And then I found a life raft of Buddhism that was much more of a present orientation, and the stakes were not the stakes that they are in evangelical Christianity, and internal suffering or eternal bliss um, is is probably the most significant example that I can think of that was along those lines.
And at some point, like you had to that faith structure, which is a worldview, you were okay with it. Like you liked it. Like it was you stayed there volitionally. Then you felt some dis-ease or tension over time intellectually. Is like, is this even true? And then you came out the other side. Are you now more at ease? Do you look back and say, wow, that was a consternation that I didn't even realize I had? Or is it just like a blip on the screen and then now you're going to go off to something else? How impactful was that to your quality of life?
Uh, Initially, obviously, total dis-ease uh, to a movement towards ease. I would say that I have exceeded the ease that I felt within that framework, but continue to move towards more ease. It's kind of like, how in shape is enough? I don't, it's where does yellow become orange on the rainbow? And it does very much mimic, it's like, right now I'm at a state where I'm like, with my physical, it's like, no, I want to see how far I can go. I'll probably plateau again and like, no, this is good enough. And I may sit there for a little while. Right now, just, the, the notion of some divine force, I kind of miss that. Like, I don't I don't need it to be, a triune God that has the power to send me to hell if I don't say the sinner's prayer right. Um, the form of meditation that prayer is, I've kind of picked up praying again. Not for not to a genie in the sky, but just the behavioral practice of prayer and contemplating what 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 I'm grateful for, but the areas of uh, that I need to be more mindful of and want to do some course correcting on. You know, will I commit to prayer for the rest of my life? I don't know, probably not, but it's a new version of that has filled a gap that gives me ease right now. So for me, that is a very organic, very present, progressive, ongoing sort of thing.
And the reason I love the way you answered that, bringing it back to that worldview, my contention isn't that there is a correct worldview and everybody should be here. You can choose any religion, and as long as you feel harmonious with that and at ease, like I believe this is the place I need to be. I don't have to judge it as right or wrong. I can believe this. I can be okay that you believe something entirely different. And I understand people can have these different worldviews for all kinds of reasons, and that's okay. We don't have to war about it. We don't have to have all these value judgments against each other. But again, if you are trying to build the next layers of framework, which would be self-efficacy and values and so forth, and you do not have the confidence that I have examined. I mean, a life, an unexamined life is not worth living. Go all the way back. Then I just don't think you can ever have that stable foundation that you think. And so, just like you went through all those years of dis-ease and transition, and then, it felt better, and now you're kind of pulling back the parts that you liked, you're recrafting this. It's the kind of identity remodeling that we all go through, and it creates a lot of turmoil for people. And I would say some of that is needless if you just realize this is a process. This is what I'm going through. Maybe I should be studying something about it, seeing a therapist, and so forth. But it is a real thing, and we all go through multiple identity changes like that.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, it is, I do think it transfers almost perfectly to being in shape. It almost perfectly transfers to that process. There are times where our level of intensity is more significant. There are times where it's like, okay, I'm okay just kind of maintaining right now. That's not working for me anymore. I think I'm going to try something a little bit different. I think all of those, I think that is a useful lens in which to look at it.
Yeah. And we said off camera before we started that this topic is so permeable and just very difficult for anybody to have consensus on, that we're going to be building this plane as we fly it. I would consider this as an introduction to the topic. I mean, we threw a lot of things out there, explain different disciplines can look at the same things and describe them different ways. But if we are going to have any appropriate or productive attempt at adding ease to our lives, contentment, feeling settled, feeling like I'm on a trajectory that's useful for me, I'm building intentional purpose for my life, I think we have to wrestle with some of these things. There have to be some definitions of the pieces on the board that we're going to be moving around. So as a prompt, you as a clinical mental health therapist, what would be your thing for people to work on for the next week? We're going to go through at least two more episodes in the series on how to build contentment and feel more settled and at ease in your life and with being a human being. What would be your first step for our audience?
I would say I would go back to just kind of a self-reflection of how powerless, how helpless, how overwhelmed do I feel right now in the circumstances that I find myself in. And the more that I feel powerless or feel even maybe more to what you were talking about in terms of like an imperative orientation of no, I'm right and you're wrong, and my need to attack other people's ideas. I would suggest to you that that's a state of powerlessness when you feel like you have to go persecute somebody else's ideas and get them to see it your way. Some self-assessment in that regard. And the more that you feel one of those two things, the more internally you need to look to the solution of that problem, that internal locus of control, that self-efficacy. And yeah, our discussion today should have raised more questions than answers. That's
Right.
because the questions have to be raised to precisely what you were saying so that we can then begin to effectively answer them.
Yep. And my prompt is everybody who's interested in this topic, who wants less anxiety and more settled confidence and forward leaning competence, go to YouTube, type in Dear Believer, watch that 10 or 11-minute video, just because it will introduce to you the fact that some of the things that you think you have come to believe on your own, may not be your thoughts, may not actually be parallel to your values, may not be useful to you. Then, if you have any more time you want to invest before our next episode, just do some keyword searches also in YouTube for worldview or life schemas or values or character strengths and virtues. I mean, there are all kinds of therapists who have modeled their careers just based on this book now. It's an entire discipline of psychology and some phenomenal lectures out there, but it will at least, as I said, start to name some of these pieces on the board for you, and you'll start to recognize, like, holy shit, this is why I do what I do. When this information comes in my brain, this is why my behavior is this, and I don't fucking like it. I want to change it. And so to understand that self-efficacy, that feeling of you being in control of your own outcomes, if it's just esoterically noise in your brain, I don't think you're going to have that much success. I think you have to start understanding what those pieces are in our control in our brains.
And for bonus points, if you haven't seen The Matrix or haven't seen it lately, go ahead and give it another view.
Yeah, I do need to do that. I need to go back. It's probably been 15 or 20 years to go watch them all from start to finish.
Okay, you may not need that level of commitment. I mean, two and three maybe were unnecessary, but one is definitely a
Yeah.
documentary, not sci-fi.
All right, man. Thank you, Jeff. I will see you next
All right.
week. And to our audience, I appreciate now that we launched this. So many of you have sent me comments personally. Some of you have posted them on social media. It's phenomenal to see that some of this information, as I knew introducing Jeff to a different audience in a different world would. It's showing some impact, and I really appreciate that, guys. We'll see you next time in Human.